The millionaire decided to test his new butler by leaving a suitcase full of money in the living room of his house. Days later, he was shocked to see what the butler was capable of doing. The Campbell mansion stood imposing against the evening sky, its windows reflecting the setting sun. Inside the main living room, Campbell, a middle-aged man with graying hair and keen eyes, paced back and forth, closely observing his new butler, Jack. The newly hired man, in his 40s with broad shoulders and calloused hands, stood upright, visibly nervous in his new work environment. Campbell abruptly stopped, turning to Jack. "So, Jack, how are you adapting to the mansion? Have you become familiar with your new tasks?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes were studying him. Jack swallowed hard before answering. "Yes, Mr. Campbell. I'm striving to learn everything as quickly as possible. The mansion is impressive and there's a lot to absorb, but I'm determined not to disappoint you," the servant replied, and Campbell nodded, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Excellent, excellent. You see, Jack, I have a, let's say, peculiar method of evaluating my employees, especially the new ones," he confessed. The millionaire walked over to a mahogany side table where a black leather suitcase rested. He carefully picked it up and opened it, briefly revealing an interior that seemed full of money, possibly worth a fortune, then closed it before the butler could fully see what was inside. "Jack, an unexpected situation has arisen. I need to take a business trip. I'll be away for a month," he said, grabbing the new butler's attention. "A whole month, sir? That's a considerable absence," Jack questioned, his eyes widening slightly. Campbell approached Jack, still holding the suitcase. "Sometimes business demands personal sacrifices. During my absence, you will be responsible for taking care of the mansion and everything in it, including this suitcase." Jack felt his heart race. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm ready for such responsibility. After all, I'm a newly hired employee." "Don't worry, Jack. This suitcase contains some important documents and valuable items. Keep it safe until my return," Campbell replied, placing the suitcase on the coffee table. The metallic sound of the bills echoed in the silence of the room. Jack looked at the suitcase, then back at Campbell, his face a mask of concern. "May I ask what exactly is inside it, sir?" Campbell smiled, an enigmatic smile. "There's no need to know the details, Jack. Just make sure it remains intact and secure." The millionaire walked over to the window, observing the well-kept garden outside. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows on the immaculate lawn. Jack remained where he was, his eyes now fixed on the suitcase, feeling the weight of responsibility fall upon his shoulders. Life sometimes puts us in unexpected situations, doesn't it, Jack? "But I'm sure you're up to the challenge," Campbell spoke, still with his back to the butler. "I'll do my best, sir. You can count on me," Jack responded, his voice firm despite the uncertainty he felt. Campbell turned, facing Jack with a piercing gaze. The butler felt as if his employer could see right through him, read every thought that crossed his mind. The silence stretched between them, heavy and laden with unspoken expectations. "Well, it's settled then. Take good care of the mansion, Jack. And remember, I'll be back in a month," Campbell finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Yes, sir. Have a good trip." "The mansion will be in perfect condition when you return," Jack assured, his hands tightening at his sides. With one last look at Jack and the suitcase, Campbell left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they disappeared. Jack stood still, listening to the sound of Campbell's car departing, feeling the weight of the silence that now reigned in the mansion. He looked at the suitcase, his heart pounding in his chest. Why would he trust me so much? He barely knows me and leaves something so valuable under my responsibility, Jack muttered to himself, running a nervous hand through his hair. The hours ticked by slowly. Jack performed his usual tasks, cleaning, organizing, but his thoughts always returned to the suitcase in the living room. He avoided entering there, as if the mere fact of being in the same room as the mysterious object might tempt him in some way. As night fell, the mansion seemed to grow larger, emptier, and Jack felt increasingly alone with his thoughts and doubts. As night wore on, Jack prepared to retire to his quarters at the back of the mansion. He did one last round, checking that all doors and windows were locked. As he passed through the main living room, his gaze was inevitably drawn to the suitcase. It seemed to glow under the dim light of the lamp, as if beckoning him. "No, I won't give in to curiosity. I was hired to take care of the mansion, not to snoop around, Jack said firmly, shaking his head. It was at that moment, just as Jack was about to turn off the lights and leave, that he heard it. A distant sound, coming from the direction of the mansion's gate. At first he thought it was just the wind, but then the sound intensified. It was a cry, a desperate wail that cut through the night's silence like a knife. Jack froze, his heart racing. My God, what is that? Who could be out there at this hour? The crying continued, growing more anguished with each passing moment. Jack looked at the suitcase, then at the door, his face a mask of conflict and concern. What should he do? Ignore the cries and follow Campbell's instructions to take care of the mansion, or answer the call of someone who seemed to be in despair? But what kind of person would he be if he ignored someone in need? Campbell trusted me to take care of everything, Jack murmured, his hand already moving towards the doorknob. With one last glance at the mysterious suitcase, Jack opened the door and stepped out into the night, the desperate cries guiding his steps towards the mansion's gate and whatever fate had in store for him. Jack advanced through the darkness of the garden, guided by the agonizing sound that tore through the night. His steps were hesitant, divided between the duty to protect the mansion and the urge to help someone in need. The crying grew louder as he approached the imposing gate of the property. Upon arrival, he saw a huddled figure leaning against the ornate bars, a young woman, no more than 25 years old, clutching a small bundle in her trembling arms. Her face was marked by tears and exhaustion. Please, someone help me. My baby, he's sick. I had taken him to the hospital. He needs urgent surgery. They refused to treat us for free. Please, I beg you, help us, she implored, her voice choked with despair. Jack felt his heart tighten. Calm down, ma'am. What happened to your son? The woman lifted her gaze, her eyes shining with hope as she saw Jack. She partially unwrapped the baby, revealing a pale, wheezing child. He was born with a heart problem. The doctors say that without the surgery he won't. He won't, she explained between sobs. Her voice failed, unable to complete the terrible sentence. Jack observed the baby, noting his irregular breathing and the bluish tinge of his skin. The urgency of the situation was palpable, weighing in the night air like a storm about to break. How much does the surgery cost? What can I do to help him? Jack asked, his mind already racing to the suitcase full of money inside the mansion. $50,000, the woman replied, her voice almost a whisper. I've sold everything I had, but it's still not enough. I don't know who else to turn to. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, his inner conflict reaching its peak. Campbell's trust weighed on his shoulders, but the life of an innocent child was at stake. He knew there was much more than $50,000 in the suitcase, but using any part of that money would be a violation of the trust placed in him. However, how could he look himself in the mirror knowing that he let a baby die when he had the means to save him? He couldn't afford such a high amount, especially since he had recently started working at the mansion after months of struggling to find a job. His character prevented him from ignoring the situation. Wait here. I'll get help, Jack said finally, his voice firm despite the storm of emotions in his chest. Thank you, God bless you, the woman exclaimed, a glimmer of hope illuminating her exhausted face. Jack ran back to the mansion, his heart pounding in his chest. Upon entering the room, his eyes immediately fell on the suitcase on the table. He opened it with trembling hands, revealing bundle after bundle of banknotes. Forgive me, Mr. Campbell, but I can't let a child die, he murmured, taking several bundles of cash. Returning to the gate, Jack handed the money to the astonished woman. Here, it should be enough for the surgery and a little extra for hospital expenses, he said, breathless. The woman looked at the money, then at Jack, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. How can I thank you? You've saved my son's life. Jack helped the woman call a taxi and accompanied her to the nearest hospital. Throughout the journey, he alternated between the feeling of having done the right thing and the fear of the consequences of his actions. At the hospital, he waited until the baby was admitted for emergency surgery, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension as he watched the doctors take the child away. It will be all right now. Your son is in good hands, he said to the mother, who was still crying with relief. I will never forget what you did for us. You are an angel sent by God into our lives, she replied, squeezing Jack's hand. Physically and emotionally exhausted, Jack returned to the mansion in the early hours of the morning. As he entered the room, his eyes fell on the open suitcase. It was then that reality hit him like a punch in the gut. He had used far more money than he had intended. Panic began to set in as he frantically counted the remaining cash. "My God, what have I done? How will I explain this to Mr. Campbell?" Jack murmured, running his hands through his hair in despair. The magnitude of his actions weighed upon him, but a small voice in his mind insisted, "You saved a life. That's priceless." Sometime later, Jack returned to the hospital, his body exhausted, but his mind in turmoil. The antiseptic smell and constant hum of machines greeted him as he walked through the impersonal white corridors. He found the surgery waiting room, where the young mother waited, her face a mixture of hope and fear. He sat down beside her, offering a comforting smile, although his own heart was heavy with the consequences of his decision. "How are you feeling? Have you had any news about the surgery? Did the doctors say anything else?" Jack asked gently, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. Terrified, but grateful. "If it weren't for you..." "Well, they've already started the surgery. I'm still waiting for news," she replied, her voice trembling. The hours dragged on, each minute seeming an eternity. Jack alternated between moments of certainty that he had done the right thing and waves of panic over how he would explain the missing money to Campbell. His eyes never left the clock on the wall, while his mind incessantly replayed the night's events. The sound of hurried footsteps and muffled voices of passing doctors only heightened his anxiety. "Why are you doing this for us? You could simply ignore it." "I noticed you might face problems for helping us," the mother suddenly asked, breaking the tense silence. Jack hesitated, searching for the right words. Because sometimes we have to follow our heart no matter the cost," Jack responded. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the surgeon emerged from the operating room, still wearing his scrubs. Jack and the mother instantly rose to their feet, their bodies tense with anticipation. The doctor removed his mask, revealing a tired but satisfied smile. The words that followed were music to their ears. The surgery was a success, the baby was stable, and the prospects were positive. The mother fell to her knees, sobbing with relief. My baby is going to live." Jack felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "See, I told you it would be all right," he muttered, his own voice choked with emotion. As the mother was taken to see her child in recovery, Jack remained in the waiting room, allowing relief to flood over him. The tension that had kept him on edge all night began to dissipate, leaving him exhausted but strangely at peace. He closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of calm after the emotional storm he had faced. "I did the right thing. No matter what happens next, I saved a life today," Jack thought, a small smile forming on his lips. But a persistent voice in his mind answered, "And what about the consequences? Campbell trusted you. You could be arrested for theft and..." "No, I can't think like that," he said to himself. However, noticing the nervous look, the baby's mother studied Jack's face. "The money helped us a lot. I have no words to thank you for that. But if it brings you trouble, you can say the fault was mine. She said, but Jack interrupted her. "Don't worry about that. I did it from the heart and will bear the consequences. The most important thing is that your little one is fine," he replied, when he was interrupted by the soft touch of a hand on his shoulder. Jack opened his eyes, finding himself face to face with a middle-aged doctor, with deep circles under his eyes and a look of concern. The doctor quickly introduced himself and, without beating around the bush, began to lay out a delicate situation. There was another patient in desperate need of help. "Sir, I overheard what you were saying. I know you've already done a lot, but we have an emergency," the doctor explained, his voice low and urgent. "An elderly lady needs immediate surgery, but has no resources. Her health condition is severely debilitated. The hospital won't accept her health insurance, and her serious health issue prevents her from being transported to a hospital that could treat her." Jack felt his stomach sink. "Doctor, I don't know if I can help any further. I've already done something I shouldn't have to help." The doctor, sensing Jack's hesitation, continued to explain the gravity of the situation. The patient in question was a 70-year-old widow with no close family. She had suffered a collapse at home and been rushed to the hospital. Her condition was critical, requiring urgent surgical intervention to save her life. The problem was that the hospital did not accept her health insurance, and her condition was so delicate that a transfer to another hospital was impossible without risk of life. "She has no one, sir. If we don't operate within the next few hours, she won't survive," the doctor pleaded, his tired but determined eyes boring into Jack's. Jack closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. "So how much would the surgery cost, doctor?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. As the doctor detailed the costs, Jack felt his heart constrict. It was a significant amount, more than he had already used to help the baby. Using more money from Campbell's bag would be crossing a line from which there was no return. He thought of the trust his employer had placed in him, the test he was surely failing. But then the image of the elderly lady, alone and dying in a hospital bed, invaded his mind. How can I choose to deny help to someone? My God, I know I shouldn't have touched the money, but the situation of these people in this hospital, I can't ignore it. Jack thought, his internal conflict reaching a critical point. The doctor's voice brought him back to reality. "Sir, if you can help, we need an answer. Time is running out." Jack felt the weight of the world on his shoulders as he nodded to the doctor, agreeing to help the elderly lady. With heavy steps, he followed the doctor through the hospital corridors, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. As they advanced, Jack couldn't help but notice the anguished faces that surrounded them. Worried families, patients on gurneys, nurses rushing from one side to the other. Each scene was a vivid reminder of human suffering and the fragility of life. "Doctor, how many other patients are in similar situations? How many does health insurance not cover medical treatment for?" Jack asked, his voice trembling. The doctor sighed heavily. "More than I would like to admit. Unfortunately, cases like these in our hospital are all too common." As they turned a corner, Jack saw a young mother cradling a sickly-looking baby, silent tears streaming down her face. Further ahead, a middle-aged man held an elderly woman's hand, whispering words of comfort as she coughed weakly. Each scene broke Jack's heart a little more, fueling his determination to do something, anything, to help. "I can't save everyone, but maybe I can make a difference for some. If I get arrested for helping, so be it. I won't ignore all these people. The kindness in my heart would never allow me to do that," Jack thought, feeling overwhelmed. As if reading his thoughts, the doctor commented, "Every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change someone's world." Arriving at the surgery ward, Jack watched the medical team preparing to operate on the elderly lady. He knew his decision to use more of Campbell's money was risky, potentially disastrous for his job and reputation. But in that moment, looking at the patient's pale, wrinkled face, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "How much more will be needed to ensure she receives the best possible treatment?" Jack asked the doctor, his voice steady despite the fear he felt. "With what you've already offered, we can cover the surgery, but the recovery will be long and costly," the doctor replied, hesitant. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was a fierce determination in his gaze. "This should cover not only her treatment, but also help other needy patients," Jack explained, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Sir, this is extraordinary. You have no idea how many lives this will impact," the doctor responded, emotional. As he watched the medical team wheel the elderly lady into surgery, Jack felt a wave of exhaustion hit him. He stumbled to a nearby chair, letting himself fall heavily onto it. The weight of his actions, the magnitude of what he had done, began to settle in. He knew there was no going back now. He had crossed a line that would change his life forever. "Mr. Campbell is going to fire me at the very least. But how could I do differently?" Jack muttered to himself, rubbing his tired face. A passing nurse offered a gentle smile. "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's always worth it," she thought without regret. The following hours passed in a blur for Jack. He wandered the hospital corridors, observing the gradual change his act of generosity was bringing about. He saw relieved smiles replacing expressions of despair, heard laughter mingled with tears of gratitude. Each scene reinforced his conviction that, despite the consequences he would surely face, he had made the right choice. "Maybe I'll lose my job, but I've gained something far more valuable," Jack reflected, feeling an inner peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. At that moment, his phone vibrated, pulling him from his thoughts. Mr. Campbell's name flashed on the screen. With a racing heart, Jack answered the call. Campbell's voice sounded strangely cheerful on the other end of the line. "Jack, my boy, I hope you've been taking good care of the mansion." "Yes, I can't wait to see how you've taken care of everything. See you soon, Jack." Campbell hung up, leaving Jack in a state of shock. The phone slipped from Jack's hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The reality of the situation hit him with full force. In less than 24 hours, he would have to face Campbell and explain what he had done with the money. Panic began to set in, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "My God, what have I done? How am I going to explain all this?" Jack muttered, feeling dizzy and disoriented. An inner voice, however, responded firmly. "You did what was right. Now it's time to face the consequences with courage." Next, Jack hurried out of the hospital, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts as he headed towards the Campbell mansion. The weight of his actions and his employer's imminent arrival compelled him to act quickly. Arriving at the property, he hesitated for a moment before the imposing front door, aware that he was about to cross another line that could not be undone. "It's the right thing to do. Those people need that money more than I need this job," he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself. With a deep sigh, he unlocked the door and went inside. Inside the mansion, Jack went straight to the room where the suitcase was kept. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, feeling the weight of the money and the responsibility he carried. He opened the suitcase, confirming its contents, and then quickly closed it, as if afraid someone might see him. The silence of the mansion seemed to accuse him, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a judgment of his actions. "There's no going back now. I just hope that somehow Mr. Campbell can understand," Jack thought, gripping the suitcase firmly. With one last look around the room, he left the mansion, locking the door behind him. After delivering the promised money to the hospital, Jack returned to the mansion with the remaining funds. The city streets were surprisingly busy for that time of night. Jack walked quickly, the suitcase clutched tightly in his hand, his eyes constantly scanning the area around him. Every passerby seemed like a potential thief, every shadow a threat. The weight of the suitcase seemed to increase with each step, not just physically but emotionally. "What am I doing? Am I a thief now? A modern-day Robin Hood?" Jack wondered, panic threatening to overcome him. An inner voice replied, "No, you are someone who chose to make a difference no matter the cost." As he advanced through the poorly lit streets, Jack couldn't help but notice the glaring inequality of the city. On one side, luxurious buildings stood imposing. On the other, dark alleys sheltered those forgotten by society. It was in one of those alleys that he heard a sound that made him stop, a muffled sob, followed by words murmured in desperation. "I have no choice. No choice," the male voice repeated, interspersed with sobs. Jack hesitated, his heart racing. Should I get involved? Haven't I done enough already? Curiosity and concern won out, and Jack cautiously approached the entrance of the alley. There, partially hidden in the shadows, was a middle-aged man, dressed in worn clothes. In his trembling hand, he held something that made Jack's blood run cold, a knife. "Hey friend, is everything okay?" Jack called softly, trying not to startle the man, who turned abruptly, his eyes wide with fear and desperation. "Stay away. Don't come any closer," he said, scared. Jack raised his hands in a pacifying gesture, aware of the briefcase he was still holding. "Calm down. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to help." "What's happening?" The man seemed to hesitate, the knife trembling in his hand. "You wouldn't understand. No one understands. I have to do this. My family. They'll be out on the street if I don't get the money. My kids are hungry. I don't know what else to do. I can't get a job anymore. I'm desperate to hear their stomachs rumbling," he explained, tears in his eyes. Jack felt a pang of empathy. Here was someone as desperate as the people at the hospital, someone about to make an irreparable mistake out of necessity. Without hesitation, Jack took a step forward. "I understand more than you think. Let me help. How much do you need?" Jack said, his voice soft but firm. The man stared at him, disbelieving. You want to help me? Why?" Jack opened the briefcase, ready to offer help, when reality hit him like a punch in the gut. The briefcase, which he had hoped still contained a significant amount, was almost empty. Only a few solitary bundles of notes remained at the bottom. "It can't be," Jack muttered, panic rising in his chest. "Did I donate all of this already?" The man, noticing Jack's expression of shock, lowered the knife. "What is it? What's wrong?" Jack closed his eyes for a moment, trying to recompose himself. He had used more money than he thought at the hospital, and now found himself in an impossible situation. How could he help this man when he barely had enough to fulfill his previous promises? "I want to help, I really do," Jack said, his voice trembling. "But I don't have as much as I thought, but I think you can buy food and what you need for a while," he said, as the man watched him intently, the hope in his eyes slowly being replaced by disappointment. With that, Jack handed him all the remaining notes. However, as the man walked away, the distant sound of sirens added a layer of urgency to the already tense situation. He waited until the sound had completely ceased before continuing his walk, the now empty briefcase in his hands. Jack returned to Campbell Manor with heavy steps, the empty briefcase swinging in his hand like a constant reminder of his actions. As he entered his room at the back of the property, he was immediately struck by the magnitude of what he had done. The room, normally a refuge, now seemed suffocating. Jack turned on the lamp, casting a dim light over the desk where he had so often organized the manor's affairs. Now this same desk would be the stage for his confession. How do you explain the inexplicable? Perhaps there is no explanation, only the naked, raw truth. Jack murmured to himself, picking up a sheet of paper and a pen. With trembling hands, Jack began to write. The words flowed, sometimes in a torrent, other times painfully slow. He described the desperate crying at the gate, the mother with the sick baby, the hospital corridors full of people in need. Each sentence was a confession, each paragraph a plea for forgiveness. As the night wore on, the pages piled up, occasionally stained by tears that Jack didn't even realize he was shedding. "Mr. Campbell, I betrayed your trust. But I cannot regret helping those in need," he wrote, the pen almost tearing the paper. The hours ticked by, marked only by the ticking of the clock and the scratching of the pen on paper. When the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, Jack finally set down his pen. Before him lay not just a letter, but a testimony of his moral journey. He reread the pages, each word a weight on his heart. Upon finishing, he carefully folded the sheets and placed them in an envelope, addressed simply, "To Mr. Campbell." That's it. There's no going back now. But at least I faced the truth head-on, Jack thought, sealing the envelope. With the letter in hand, Jack began to gather his few belongings. Each item he placed in his backpack was a reminder of the short span of time he had spent at the manor, of the opportunities now lost. He knew running away wasn't the noblest solution, so he would deliver the letter directly to his boss. The room, which just hours ago had felt suffocating, now felt strangely empty. Jack took one last look around, his eyes catching the details that would soon be mere memories. The clock on the wall read 5:30 in the morning. Campbell had said he would arrive in the morning. The hallway was dark and silent, illuminated only by the faint light that seeped in through the windows. Jack took a step out of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. It was then that he heard it, the sound of approaching footsteps. Before he could react, a figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the hallway. "Jack, what are you doing awake so early?" Campbell's familiar voice echoed down the hallway. Jack froze, unsure of how to begin explaining what he should. "Mr. Campbell, I didn't expect to see you so early." Campbell approached, his eyes roving over Jack's figure, noticing the backpack, the guilty expression, the letter in his trembling hand. The silence between them was palpable, laden with unasked questions and unspoken truths. Jack felt as if the world was crumbling around him, each second an eternity of anticipation and fear. "It seems we have much to discuss, doesn't it?" Campbell finally said, his voice surprisingly calm. Jack swallowed hard, knowing the moment of truth had arrived sooner than expected. "Yes, sir. I suppose we do." Campbell motioned for Jack to follow him to his office, the silence between them heavy and fraught with tension. As they entered the room, the morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, illuminating the austere setting. Jack remained standing, restless, as Campbell sat behind his imposing mahogany desk. With trembling hands, Jack held out the letter. "Mr. Campbell, I wrote this to explain everything. I did something that could be considered a breach of your trust, and I wrote down everything that happened," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Campbell took the envelope, his eyes never leaving Jack's face. "I understand. But before I read it, I would like to hear from you, Jack." Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his actions pressing on his chest. The words began to flow, hesitant at first, but soon gaining strength and urgency. "Mr. Campbell, I betrayed your trust. The money you left, I used it. Not for myself, but to help desperate people. It all started with a baby who needed urgent surgery. The mother was at the gate, crying, begging for help. I couldn't just ignore her." His voice trembled, but he continued, the words now pouring out in an unstoppable torrent. "After that, I saw so much need at the hospital. An elderly woman who would die without surgery, families who couldn't afford treatments. Every face, every story broke my heart. I knew it was wrong to use the money without your permission, but how could I sleep at night knowing I had the means to help and didn't do it?" Jack gestured as he spoke, his emotion palpable. "You entrusted me with the mansion, but in that suitcase was more than just money. There was hope, there were lives. I saw children smile again. I saw relief in the eyes of desperate parents. I know it wasn't my place to decide, but in that moment I felt it was the right thing to do." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mr. Campbell. I know what I did was a breach of trust. I'm ready to face the consequences, but I want you to understand that every penny was used to make a difference in someone's life. It wasn't out of greed or self-interest." Jack went on, his voice now laden with conviction. "We live in a world where inequality is glaring, where some have so much and others so little. That night I felt I could balance that scale a little. I know it's not a justification, but maybe it can be an explanation. I saw pain, desperation, and I could do something about it. How could I call myself human if I turned my back?" He spoke of the transformation he saw at the hospital, of the relief on the faces of the people he helped. He described in detail the man in the alley, about to commit a crime out of desperation, and how a little help could change the course of a life. "I'm not saying I'm a hero, Mr. Campbell. Far from it. I'm just someone who found himself faced with a moral dilemma and chose the path I believed was right, even knowing there would be consequences." Jack finally stopped, breathless, his last words echoing in the silence of the office. "I understand if you want to fire me or even report me to the police. I'll accept any punishment you deem appropriate, but I can't and won't regret helping those people. If I could go back, I'd do it all over again." Campbell remained impassive throughout Jack's speech, his face a mask of neutrality. When Jack finished, the millionaire finally opened the letter, his eyes quickly scanning the pages. The silence stretched, each second seeming an eternity for Jack. What is he thinking? Does he understand, or does he just see me as a thief? Jack wondered, his heart pounding in his chest. After what seemed like forever, Campbell carefully folded the letter and placed it on the desk. He rose slowly, his gaze finally meeting Jack's. "Jack, you've surprised me. But before we discuss further, I'd like you to accompany me on a walk around town," he said, his voice inscrutable. Jack blinked, confused. "A walk, sir? Now?" Campbell nodded, a slight, enigmatic smile on his lips. "Yes, Jack. There's something I need to show you." Jack followed Campbell out of the mansion, his heart still racing, uncertain of what to expect. The silence between them was palpable as they got into Campbell's luxurious car. The city streets blurred by, Jack barely registering the route they took. His mind was filled with questions and concerns. Finally, the car stopped in front of the hospital where it had all begun. "Why are we here, Mr. Campbell? What kind of punishment are you thinking of giving me?" Jack asked, his voice trembling slightly. Campbell merely nodded enigmatically. "You'll see, Jack. Let's go inside." Upon entering the hospital, Jack was immediately struck by memories of the previous night. The antiseptic smell, the muffled sound of machines and voices, everything seemed so familiar and yet so different in the light of day. Campbell guided him through the corridors with surprising confidence, as if he knew the place intimately. They stopped in front of a room and, with a gesture, Campbell indicated that Jack should enter first. Inside the room, Jack found the young mother he had helped the night before. She was sitting beside her baby's crib, who was now breathing calmly, connected to fewer tubes than before. Upon seeing Jack, the woman's eyes filled with tears. "It's you. My son. He's going to live thanks to you," she exclaimed, rising to embrace Jack, who, surprised by the reaction, looked to Campbell, who observed the scene with a discreet smile. Campbell guided them to another room, where they found the elderly lady Jack had helped. She was sitting on the bed, surrounded by nurses checking her vital signs. Upon seeing Jack, her face lit up with a radiant smile. "My guardian angel. The doctors said you helped me. Without the surgery, I wouldn't have survived the night. How can I thank you?" she said, extending a trembling hand to Jack, who felt a lump in his throat, unable to respond. Campbell placed a hand on his shoulder, gently guiding him out of the room. They continued their tour of the hospital, stopping at several rooms. In each one, Jack was received with overflowing gratitude and stories of renewed hope. Entire families embraced him, children smiled at him, and even the doctors and nurses expressed their gratitude for what he had done. "Mr. Campbell, I don't understand. How did you know about all this?" Jack was finally able to say, feeling overwhelmed. Campbell smiled. "Patience, Jack. Everything will be explained soon." After visiting the last room, Campbell took Jack back to the car. The return to the mansion was as silent as the journey there, but this time the silence seemed charged with a different energy. Upon arriving, Campbell led Jack to his office, closing the door behind them. "Jack," Campbell began, his voice now laden with emotion, "what you saw today was just a fraction of the impact your actions had. But before I explain further, I need to tell you a story. A story about a young millionaire who one day realized that his wealth meant little if he couldn't make a difference in people's lives." Campbell paused, his eyes fixed on Jack. "Years ago, I started receiving requests for help at my mansion. Desperate people, heartbreaking stories. They saw this imposing house and realized I had enough money to help them, and I wanted to do that. But I also wanted to make sure my help would reach the right hands. That's when I had an idea. A test, if you will. I started leaving a suitcase full of money for each new employee I hired, always with the same story of a business trip." He continued, his voice gaining intensity. "Over the years, I saw dozens of butlers pass through this mansion. All of them completely ignored the requests for help, concerned only with protecting the money. Others succumbed to temptation and used the money for their own benefit. But you, Jack, you were the first to do exactly what I hoped someone would do. I was shocked because, for the first time in years, I found someone like you." Campbell stood up, walking to the window. "You not only helped those in need, but you did so knowing it could cost you your job, your reputation. You put the well-being of others above your own. And that, Jack, is the true essence of compassion and generosity. Furthermore, you confessed everything, even knowing that I would have the power to have you arrested or fired." He turned to face Jack, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "What you did that night wasn't just using the money to help. You gave hope, you saved lives, you changed destinies, and you did it all believing you would be sacrificing your own future in the process." Campbell walked back to his desk, picking up the letter Jack had written. "Your words here, your confession, your regret for betraying my trust but not for helping. That shows a character that is rare to find, Jack. A character that I have searched for a long time." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The real test was never about protecting the money, Jack. It was about having the courage to do the right thing, even when it seemed wrong. It was about seeing beyond the obvious, about seeing the humanity in every desperate situation." Campbell smiled, a genuine and warm smile. "Jack, not only did you pass the test, you exceeded all my expectations. And that's why I want to offer you not only forgiveness, but a partnership. A partnership in my philanthropic efforts. A chance to continue making a difference, but now on a much larger scale." He extended his hand to Jack. "What do you say, Jack? Are you ready to transform lives on a scale you never imagined possible?" Jack was speechless, his mind trying to process everything he had heard. "Mr. Campbell, I don't know what to say." Campbell smiled. Say yes, Jack. Together, we can do much more than you did that night. Much more. Jack felt a wave of emotion wash over him as he shook Campbell's hand, sealing his commitment to this new journey. In the days that followed, he dove headfirst into Campbell's philanthropic projects, absorbing every detail, every strategy to maximize the impact of their actions. The long hours of work went unnoticed. His mind focused solely on how he could help more people, how he could make a difference on a larger scale. I never imagined there could be so many ways to help, Jack commented to Campbell during one of their meetings. Campbell smiled, pleased with his new partner's enthusiasm. And this is just the beginning, Jack. There's an entire world out there waiting for our help. The days turned into weeks, and Jack found himself involved in projects ranging from building schools in underprivileged communities to funding innovative medical research. Each new endeavor brought with it unique challenges, but also unimaginable rewards. Jack saw smiles open on faces once marked by hopelessness, heard stories of transformed lives, and felt the weight of his responsibility grow with each passing day. How do you manage it all, Mr. Campbell? Jack asked one night, exhausted but fulfilled after a long day's work. With the certainty that every effort is worthwhile, Jack, and with the help of people like you, that's what makes meaningful change possible, Campbell replied, a contemplative look on his face. As Jack delved deeper into his new role, he truly began to understand the reach of Campbell's wealth and influence. What had once seemed an unimaginable fortune in the suitcase now revealed itself to be just a fraction of the resources they had at their disposal to do good. Jack felt humbled and at the same time empowered by the trust Campbell placed in him. Sometimes I wonder if I'm worthy of all this responsibility, Jack confessed to Campbell during a moment of doubt. Campbell placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. It's precisely because you have those doubts that you're the right person for this, Jack. Finally, after a month of intense and rewarding work, the day of Jack's first payment arrived. Campbell summoned him to the office, handing him an envelope. Jack opened it, his eyes widening at the generous value of the check in his hands. For a moment he was speechless, his mind flashing back to that fateful night when he used the money from the suitcase to help those in need. Mr. Campbell, this is far more than I expected, Jack stuttered, still staring at the check. Campbell smiled, observing Jack's reaction closely. You deserve every penny, Jack. Your work has been exceptional, he replied. Jack fell silent for a few moments, an internal battle playing out in his mind. Finally, with a deep sigh, he made his decision. Jack placed what he had just received on Campbell's desk. Mr. Campbell, I can't accept this, Jack said, his voice firm despite the nervousness he felt. Not before returning the money I used that night. Here is everything I took from the suitcase, plus the interest I calculated. I know it took a while, but I promised myself I would pay back every cent. Campbell looked at the money on the desk, then at Jack, an expression of surprise and admiration on his face. Jack, you continue to surprise me, but this isn't necessary. That money... Jack gently interrupted him. Please, Mr. Campbell, I need to do this, not for you, but for me, to know that I'm starting this new phase of my life with a clean conscience. Jack, you don't understand, Campbell began, but Jack pressed on, determined. I do understand that you probably don't care about that money, that it was part of the test, but for me it's a matter of integrity. To have knowing that I'm here not because of what I did that night, but because of what I can do from here on out. Campbell fell silent for a moment, studying Jack with a newfound look of respect. Finally he nodded, a smile forming on his lips. Very well, Jack. If it means that much to you, I accept, but with one condition. What condition, Mr. Campbell? Jack asked, a mixture of relief and curiosity in his voice. Campbell picked up the checks and handed them back to Jack. That you use this money to start your own charity fund, a project entirely your own, to help people in whichever way you see fit. Jack, feeling the weight of the responsibility and opportunity Campbell was offering him, cracked a smile. With a deep breath, he raised his eyes, a hesitant smile forming on his lips. Mr. Campbell, I don't know what to say. This is more than I could have imagined, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. Campbell smiled, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. Use that money to continue the good work you started that night. In the days that followed, Jack immersed himself in the planning of his own charity fund. He spent hours researching, consulting experts, and reflecting on the most urgent needs he had witnessed. Campbell provided guidance when asked, but allowed Jack to forge his own path. "How's the planning going, Jack?" Campbell asked one afternoon, finding him surrounded by papers. Jack looked up, his eyes shining. "It's challenging, Mr. Campbell, but every challenge brings a new opportunity to help." Weeks later, Jack was ready to launch his initiative, focused on providing emergency medical assistance to those who couldn't afford it. On launch day, he found himself standing before a small crowd, his heart pounding as he stepped up to the podium. "Today we launch a promise that no one will ever again have to choose between health and financial ruin," Jack declared, his voice firm and passionate. Applause echoed through the room, and Jack saw tears in the eyes of some present. The months passed, and Jack's charity fund grew beyond his expectations. He coordinated teams of volunteer doctors, negotiated with hospitals, and inspired others to join the cause. Each day brought new challenges and new stories of hope. 6 months after the launch, Jack organized a recognition event. The hall was filled with smiling faces, many of whom he recognized as people he had personally helped. As he stepped onto the stage, his eyes met Campbell's in the crowd. "When I started this journey, I thought I was alone," Jack began, emotional. "But looking at all of you today, I realize I've never been. We are a community of compassionate hearts." In the audience, he saw familiar faces, the young mother with her healthy baby, the recovered elderly lady, and even the man from the alley, now an active volunteer. As he concluded his speech, Jack was surrounded by people sharing their stories. Campbell approached, a proud smile on his face. "Jack, my boy, you've exceeded all my expectations," Campbell said, embracing him. Jack returned the embrace, emotional. "Thank you for believing in me and giving me this opportunity." Later, in a quiet moment, Jack reflected on his journey, from a simple butler to a respected philanthropist. A serene smile formed on his lips as he looked toward the future, eager for new opportunities to help and inspire. Who would have thought a suitcase of money could change so many lives? Jack thought, his heart overflowing with gratitude. With that thought, he rejoined the celebration, ready to face any challenge, knowing he had the power to make a difference, one act of kindness at a time. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We are immensely grateful to have you here with us. Now you can click on the links appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, filled with valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.